Alrighty then, ladies and gents, so in today's video I wanted to talk about something that I wanted to do a video about for quite some time, but have not just really gotten the chance to do so properly. So one of the things that I wanted to get into is basically talking about new riders on super sport bikes. And I know I've mentioned this in the past, and there are tons of videos that people have done about this for quite some time now. Lots of bloggers have talked about the topic, but I feel like something that gets lost in translation a lot of the times is the fact that not that many people actually know about the fact that there is so much power hidden in these bikes up on top until they come on cam, that a lot of new riders are lulled into a false sense of security riding on these bikes. You know, they'll go out and they'll do potentially sometimes years of riding without really tapping into that final kind of last bit of the power in these bikes, and you know, it does give you this kind of idea that you are almost invincible, or that you're capable of doing things on the bike, when in reality there's still so much left on the table in these things that it's kind of ridiculous. And now, of course, modern bikes, for example, like the GSXR, the new S1000RR, where they have things like basically VVTi and you know, shift cam technology, as BMW calls it. But it's really, none of it is really something that makes the bikes more tenable for new riders. It does make them behave a little bit better on the street, because you do get that torque a little bit lower down in the power band that you otherwise typically lack in super sport categories. But at the same time, you know, the power at the top is still there, so it's not as if by some magic waving of the wand they've now made the bike that much more rideable for beginners. Instead, it really comes down to the nannies that are on that bike. But with that said, getting back to that power band, the issue is again that until that bike comes alive, and depending on the machine that you're riding, you know, it's going to be anywhere from, you know, 13,000 to, who knows, 15 to 16,000 RPM when you're hitting that peak. And again, you know, that just means that you could be potentially looping the bike once you get it into that, basically into that field, or you could end up basically sliding out of the bike if you're not gripping the tank when this happens. And so this is just one of those things that you really have to be super mindful about, that these machines can be very kind of conducive to being ridden on the streets at, you know, very basic speeds, nothing super crazy, but then they really come alive so quickly up top that it's just bound to take you by surprise, especially if you're not somebody who has had a lot of experience on prior bikes, has not really ridden, you know, really fast machines before. And that's why, you know, a lot of people, of course, recommend that you start off on something like an SV650 or, you know, a 400 class bike, even 250s in some cases, just so you can get used to what the throttle application is like, so you can feel out where the traction is going to be, so that you can see basically everything that you can do with that bike is going to be, for the most part, on you as the rider. Again, you know, of course, it's going to depend on the kind of bike that you get, as some of this technology is now filtering down into the lower spec bikes as well, slowly but surely. However, I think the biggest thing, and this is both a good factor and kind of a detractor at the same time, is the fact that you do have all these traction control systems. You have lean sensitive ABS, you've got things like relay control, you've got stability control on modern bikes, depending on the model you get. And there's just a lot of vernacular in there, a lot of different various kind of acronyms, etc., that will basically kind of send your head spinning unless you basically dug into the manual and never lifted your face out of it to read the countless pages that are in there. And again, you know, this is a bonus, but it's also a not so good situation for a newbie rider at the same time. Now, I say it's a good thing because, you know, for example, for me on this bike, even though I came from a Yamaha R1, that bike had no rider aids, no power modes of any kind. There's really, you know, really nothing to keep me from basically sliding out or not locking my brakes, etc. So it's one of those things where you have to be mindful of what the bike has, but at the same time, you know, even though you're not necessarily picking up the fundamental skills when riding on bikes like this, you are getting something else in return, which is that these bikes will keep you safer. And I think if you're somebody that is able to ride, right, you're able to keep riding because the bike keeps you safe, then potentially this is something that's going to be a huge deal for you, because if you're able to continue riding, you haven't fallen down, you haven't crashed out on the bike because it saved you a couple of times, then chances are you're going to come back and you're going to do more, more biking, potentially buy another bike for yourself. You're going to go out and ride in general. So I think that's a huge positive. Of course, there are going to be a lot of people who will say, well, having all those different gadgets on the bike also means that there is going to be an extra hefty price that you have to pay for something like this. And for the most part, I would have to say that I agree. There is definitely something to be said that once you start adding all these electronic doodads onto the bike, the cost tends to skyrocket in terms of maintenance and everything. So you do have to keep that in the back of your mind as a budgetary constraint that you may have potentially down the road, or even with the initial purchase price of a lot of these machines, as they will certainly set you back, quite a fair bit. Now, again, with that said, for this bike in particular, I have had mainly just the one maintenance issue of my regulator and rectifier failing on the bike really early on. This bike has just crossed the 1,000-mile barrier not so long ago, and I haven't been doing a whole lot of riding, arguably, but again, it's just a little bit odd, and my biggest kind of issue is the placement of where they put the regulator and rectifier, which was just ahead of the swing arm, the rear swing arm. And I think to me, this is one of the worst positions that you could place a regulator into. Of course, some bikes place them directly in the heat from the radiator, being basically on the left side of the frame, etc. But again, I don't feel like this area gets a whole lot of airflow, and it seems like the one that was on this bike was not rated for the kind of temperatures that you would expect in this lower part of the engine. Now, when the bike isn't running, it doesn't seem like the area gets super hot. However, when you actually do get moving, a lot of the hot air is basically traveling through the fairings and into that space, and then possibly deflecting off of the rear mudguard, or mud splash guard, whatever you want to call it, and then just basically circulating hot air inside of that little pocket behind the transmission and in front of the rear tire. And so I think it's a really dumb decision. I'm not entirely sure why BMW had decided that this is how they're gonna, kind of put it in there. And the other problem is, you basically have to have like very specialist bendy tools to get, to get to that part and take it out, which I also fail to understand. So I'm not sure how they came to this absolutely fantastic decision to, basically place this part in such an inaccessible area, so as to, if somebody has to go and replace it, it's going to cost them an arm and a leg because of the time that a technician would take to basically disassemble that part, take it out, put the new one in, and then secure everything back in place. So what I ended up doing is actually I relocated the rectifier to the rear under the passenger seat cowl, and even though it looks a little bit ugly with wires running up the side of the bike into the back, I feel like, despite the fact that it's not really getting a ton of airflow in there, I may end up doing something about that, but for the time being, at least my bike is charging. So one of the side effects that I was having is that the bike would just randomly die, or, if I happened to stall on a traffic light somewhere, it just didn't have the amps to be able to start the bike and crank it over, which became a huge pain because I was basically having to either call AAA or flag down a nearby motorist and carry heavy cables to charge the battery with me all the time, which obviously is less than ideal. But again, some decisions that BMW have made here, I can't really agree with necessarily. And it's not like the part is particularly heavy. It tends to be a part that's less than a pound in overall weight, I feel like. So there's no real reason to put it there, not even mass centralization or anything of that sort. So again, just really strange that this happened. But, with that said, I've been riding this bike for a very long time with really no other problems than that. And I think that kind of segues into, my other point that I want to make about getting, some of the more modern bikes, which is that you're generally going to spend a lot more time riding them than you are going to spend basically sitting in the garage, wrenching on it constantly, having to fix some random electrical glitch that just happened to have come up. And typically speaking, you can get yourself an OBD tool to be able to scan and have the bike's ECU tell you essentially what's going wrong, allowing you to potentially track down problems very easily inside the bike. For me, it's been useful to track this down to the regulator / rectifier, but again, it just depends on the model year you get it depends on if the scan tools are available for you to get and to try out. You know, for everyone, it's going to be, I feel like, a little bit different, but at the same time, you know, it is what it is. Like, you kind of take the good with the bad when it comes to getting an older bike and trying to get it back on the road, even though it may be a classic or something, and you end up rebuilding it, in which case, you know, potentially you're maybe doing it to turn a profit of some kind. But with these sort of modern, you know, super bikes, it's just one of those things that you have to be aware of, that there are, on the one hand, ease of repair situations because you can scan everything, but on the other hand, there are so many systems in here and so many wires that it can be kind of a nightmare to get to. Now, for me, sort of the last topic that I wanted to cover for kind of today's vlog, you know, is this bike and, you know, what is going to happen to it. And, you know, right now I'm not really planning on selling the bike, but as I get older, I kind of want to try something a little bit different. I do want to try getting to do some more off-road stuff, and that means procuring a dirt bike. Now, I have looked into getting also possibly like an adventure bike, like a Tenere 700 or something along those lines, you know, something on the cheaper side, but at the same time, still capable. And I think the issue is, you know, the weight of those bikes is really not conducive to somebody who's a beginner like me. And also I have a very tiny inseam, which means that for me to ride that bike and be comfortable is kind of difficult. And even though, yes, you know, you can get lowering links and you can, for example, shave down the seat and stuff, but that kind of defeats the purpose because the idea is to have ground clearance on machines like that. And as soon as you take that away, you're also messing with the sort of geometry of the bike, and it just starts behaving strangely. So that's not something I want to do. But I am looking at potentially getting like a 250 Yamaha, you know, Supermoto or Enduro, whatever you want to call it, to see if I can start kind of doing a little bit in my backyard, just do some more videos, ride out, and just kind of check out what that life is all about. I feel like, you know, it's very easy to go and do single track on those bikes, and at the same time, it's going to be something where, you know, I can ride it on the street with no problems, without having to, you know, potentially jump off onto one of the pegs and then let my feet down. So for me, that's a big plus. Now, it's going to be different for everybody, but, you know, I feel like once kind of you get to this certain stage in your life, you really start to look at what other bikes are available to you, you know, what sort of other riding styles you can acquire. And I think when you're in dirt, you kind of learn a little bit more about traction control, and in terms of being able to come to grips with the different forces that are being placed upon the bike, and just being able to tackle different various kinds of terrain. And that's not really something that you get on the street. You know, yeah, there are tons of different kinds of street bikes out there, but generally you get the same experience over and over again, and there isn't this same sense of adventure, I feel like, as you get from a dirt bike, where you can just go into places that, you know, potentially you can't even take a car. And so that's where it becomes a little bit more interesting, because you'll see places, possibly even meet people that you haven't met before. And then should the need arise, you can always go and actually take it to places where there are kind of off-road tracks, etc., trails that you can go on to do a little bit more exploring. So that'll basically cover this video for the time being. I'll see if I can start putting out some more stuff depending on how time allows. I've been a little bit busy, and so I know this is the first vlog I've had in a number of years now, as the channel has been kind of dormant for the most part, but I will try and keep uploading at least. You know, we'll see if I can do every 2 weeks or something along those lines, to kind of keep the content coming for you guys. So with that, I will see you in the next video, and until then,